Artists, and welcome to another art lesson from the arting room. This week is all about line and shape, and today's painting is going to focus on shape. We're going to be talking about geometric shapes and organic shapes, and we're also going to be focusing on the artist, Sarah Krajewski. She's an artist who's working right now, and she focuses mostly on shape in her abstract paintings. So we're going to be looking at some of her original artworks while we do our painting. The supplies you'll need for today's art project are white paper to paint on, a selection of paintbrushes, different maybe sizes and shapes if you have them. If you don't, that's okay if you only have one. A cup with water, some paints. I'm going to be using tempera paints today, but if all you have are markers or crayons or watercolor, those are totally okay too. Listen, the materials that we're using on this project are totally optional. The assignment is just about the shapes. And some paper towel. On mine, I've put down a clear mat. If you don't have one, just make sure that the surface you're working on is washable in case your paint or marker spills off the edge of your paper. Okay guys, let's get started. Sarah Krajewski's prints are really beautiful. She uses a lot of color. She uses shape and lines in her prints and paintings. And you can see in all of her artwork that we have here how important it is that her shapes flow and they have a good composition. We're going to be experimenting with painting, or if you only have markers or crayons, drawing some of these shapes organically or geometrically. You can make this painting however you want. It doesn't have to look exactly like Mrs. Hamilton's. So I want to show you two more paintings by Sarah. So these are original paintings of hers. I have them up in my house. This one is going to the art room. And I think that they're so beautiful because we're talking about simple lines and shapes that we already know how to draw and paint. And we're just putting them in an interesting way that makes it exciting to look at these paintings, where we want to stick around and look at them for a little bit longer than looking at maybe shapes in a math book. So when we're talking about shapes, a geometric shape would be a shape that we discuss in math class. So you're talking about shapes that are circle, square, rectangle, triangle, shapes that you talk a lot about in math. In art, we talk about organic shapes, and these are shapes that don't necessarily have a line or name or stick to a specific line. So these are a lot of really good examples of organic shapes. Now, some of them might look like shapes that you have names for, like an oval, but most of these are pretty organic, and they don't necessarily follow any rules that you would have in a math class. We do discuss organic shapes a lot when we talk about nature, because shapes like shells and leaves, those are organic shapes too. But we do talk a lot about organic shapes in art class because when we're painting, it's really difficult to get very specific lines and angles and corners. So organic shapes are something that we discuss a lot in the art room. All right, I'm going to set some of these aside. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out and leave right here some reference pictures that you guys can look at while you're doing your art. Okay, I want to make sure that you can see them. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is decide what's going to be on the bottom. So if you look at this painting right here at the bottom, the purple oval looking shape is underneath this organic circle, this X, and this circular line. So that would be the shape that we would paint first. So pick any color, pick any type of shape, and I want you to do at least 3 of them on your paper. And they can be anywhere, and they can be any size, and they can look however you want. So I'm just going to go at it and paint an organic shape. Make sure that your organic shape is not like a shape you would see in your math book. So if it looks sort of like an oval, but not quite like an oval, that's great and perfect. We just want to focus here on painting organic shapes and not getting too precise about angles, lines, and corners. All right, so I'm cleaning my brush off, wiping it off, and now I'm going to paint a second shape on my paper. Now, it's really important to get some really good color on your paper because we are going to be doing this painting in layers. So if you're using paint, you have to wait for this layer to dry before we paint on top of it with overlapping organic shapes or lines. Okay, so I've got another really good shape. It's sort of like an oval, but not really like an oval. And I've painted it really thick, and so the color's really good. I'm cleaning it off in my water and then getting the excess off on my paper towel. And now I'm gonna pick a different color and a different organic shape. And paint it in. Now, for the next step, you need to make sure that this is dry before we add anything on top. So I'm going to make sure that these three shapes are totally dry before I add any more overlapping organic or geometric shapes or lines. So I'm going to let this dry and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have dried my three organic shapes, and now I'm going to paint some geometric shapes. Now, I would try and keep it even. So if you've got three organic shapes, try and keep about the same amount of geometric shapes. So I'm going to take a different brush. This one is a flat brush, and it makes it so that you can paint straight-ish lines a little bit easier. So I'm choosing to paint a rectangle. And then this brush, you can see, instead of it being round like this one, it's straight across. This is a flat brush. I'm gonna clean my brush off. Now these types of painting this way can take quite a bit of time if you leave the paint really thick. If the paint is a little bit thinner, in the thinner areas, it dries a lot faster. If you leave on the edges like globbies of paint, then it can take a longer time to dry. So some of my areas that you see where the paint is thicker took quite a bit of time to dry. I dried them with a heater. It's like a hair dryer. And I'm gonna paint a triangle. And this one I'm going to overlap with one of my organic shapes. I'm still using my brush that makes it easier for me to paint straight lines. Okay, I'm going to clean my brush off. Dry it off, and I'm going to paint one more geometric shape. So now I'm going to attempt to paint an oval. Now remember, We've got some organic shapes on here, so if it's not perfect, I wouldn't stress out too much. Okay, that's actually a pretty good oval. All right, I'm gonna clean my brush off. All right, so I'm going to paint a line on my painting right now, and I'm going to keep my lines in areas where it's already dry, so I'm not gonna overlap on my geometric shapes. These lines are only gonna go through my organic shapes because those are already dry. So on these, you can see how the lines are either, these are curly lines right here. We've got some like wavy lines and like crooked lines. You can make your line however you want. It's just have it go from one end to your painting and have it overlap some of your shapes. Doesn't have to go across the whole painting. But what we're doing here is we're adding some interest to our painting. So it just has, so the viewer stops and looks at our painting for a little bit longer than if they were just looking at pictures of shapes. So we're adding some interest so that the eye is looking at multiple things on our painting besides just the shapes. Okay, so there's one line. I'm gonna clean my brush off, dry it off. I am using a smaller brush than my first brush. So this is a round brush 2. This is the size that I used for my shapes, and this is the size that I'm using for my lines. It's a little bit smaller so that I can get thinner lines. If you want a thicker line, you can go ahead and use a bigger brush. So let me grab a color I haven't used yet. And now I'm going to paint a different line. And where I have the shapes, I'm painting a little bit thicker so that I don't see this blue color behind my pink. I'm going to do one more loop, and then we'll talk about adding extra details. Okay, so I have finished painting that line. I like the way that it looks. So now I'm gonna let these lines and geometric shapes dry, and I'll be right back and we'll talk about adding details to our shapes and maybe adding some extra glistening gold details or pepper. Okay. Now that my paint is dry, what I'm gonna do is go in and add extra details. So I'm gonna go in and add line details to one of the shapes, and I'm gonna add some shape detail to the painting. So I'm gonna pick a color and I'm going to be painting right on top. So does not have to be perfect. These are abstract prints, so it's okay if it sort of looks like a line or a shape, but it doesn't. All right, so what I ended up doing is I finished painting all the lines on my triangle using the yellow. And I made sure that they weren't all perfect. Some of them are thicker, some of them are thinner. Then I took my brush and on the stick handle portion, I dipped it into the paint and then I brought it over to my painting and I made dots or tiny circles on my painting. I did that in 2 different locations for some interest. Now the next thing I'm going to do is get a little bit of water on my brush, not a ton. You do want to make sure your brush is primed though for this to work. And then I'm going to dip it in the black paint and I want to kind of sprinkle some black on my painting. For some interest. Sarah Krajewski calls this pepper, adding pepper to the paintings so you can see what that kind of looks like. Now on her, some of her prints, she has also added Sharpie markers. So you can add Sharpie marker to your paintings to maybe add a saying or something that means a lot to you, or to add smaller lines. It's totally up to you. Okay guys, I can't wait to see what you do with this and see your abstract paintings inspired by Sarah Krajewski. Make sure that if you're on social media, you tag me, or if you're in the Google Classroom, that you submit a picture of what you created. Bye guys!